women have made many contributions to the international indigenous movement from the very beginning. In the 70s and of course from the early 80s, when we had for the first time, the first ever UN mechanism on indigenous populations, the UN Working Group on Indigenous Populations, and we had many indigenous sisters coming. And, for example, I remember Rigoberta Menchú, who was in 1982 and 83, who was hovering outside the halls of the working group, and it was her strong presence when she was able to get to be given the floor in 1983, and it was such an amazing intervention she made, such an impact, that it was, I think, it was such a moral impulse. The work had to open its doors to the indigenous communities of the world. But despite, of course, of many achievements that we have seen, both in the indigenous movement and in particular in the indigenous women's movement, indigenous women continue to face a great many challenges in their efforts to realize their human rights.
Politics, the absence of women leaders, an increased number of women participating but are only counted as numbers. We still see the absence of women as leaders and making decisions. Governance structures are still male-dominated and control resources, creating barriers. Access and opportunities for women are still minimal.
The other thing I want to tell you about Suriname in general is that Suriname doesn't recognize the rights of indigenous by law. We don't have land rights. We don't have any rights, I have to say. Knowing this, you can put the position of indigenous women in Suriname in perspective. Because, as you know, the indigenous women are in the households. They have to provide food. They are responsible for the livelihood of themselves and the children. And not having land means they don't have any security.
When we talk about balance, gender equality, the history of our people, it was the young people that we focused on. We needed to teach our young, not just the women, but also the young men in our communities that it was important to learn their history, because at this point, many of our young people have been denied the history and to be taught through our languages.
And the issue of climate change, since negotiations took place in Copenhagen, we foresee that there is nothing which is going to benefit, indigenous peoples. If the issues of indigenous peoples are not put on board, if states do not put issues of indigenous peoples in their frameworks, so that when they are designing programs, they should, give the principle of prior informed consent, so that indigenous peoples will know what is happening in their lands and how can they benefit